A struggling janitor trying to make ends meet has no idea his daughter's letter to a company CEO will end up in the hands of a billionaire and that one innocent plea will turn their entire world upside down. Before we dive in, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead as Daniel Carter pushed his mop down the long marble corridor, the scent of lemon cleaner trailing in his wake. The building was quiet, eerily so. By day, it bustled with the kind of people who wore sleek suits and talked too fast on phones that cost more than his rent, but by night, it belonged to Daniel. A world of smudged windows, coffee-stained carpets, and trash bins that told their own kind of story. He moved with practiced rhythm, his faded work boots squeaking softly against the polished floor. The silence wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. Predictable. After everything life had thrown at him, predictability was a gift. Daniel paused at the end of the hallway, shifting his weight as he rubbed at a stubborn scuff mark. His back ached in the familiar way it always did around hour 3. He was 42, but some days it felt like double that. Still, he didn't complain, couldn't afford to. Not when an 8-year-old girl with a galaxy of freckles and a crooked front tooth was counting on him, Lily. His reason for everything. Her drawing was tucked into the front pocket of his jumpsuit, a crayon-sketched masterpiece of a stick-figure dad holding hands with a stick-figure girl, under a blazing yellow sun, and the words, "Best Dad Ever," scribbled in bubble letters. He'd looked at it at least 5 times tonight already, just a glance, each time he stopped for water or adjusted his gloves. Just enough to remind himself why he kept pushing. A beep echoed from the service elevator, and Daniel wheeled his cart back toward the janitor's closet. He moved quietly, out of habit, as though his very presence after hours might offend the air of importance these halls clung to. He didn't mind being invisible. Invisibility had its perks. It let you observe. And Daniel had learned plenty just by listening through half-cracked office doors and forgotten conference calls. He clocked out a little after 3:00 a.m., the building still and hushed around him. Outside, the city yawned under a blanket of stars. He zipped up his jacket, pulled his knit cap low over his ears, and started the walk home. It was a quiet life, a small one, but it was his. And he would protect it with everything he had. The vending machine blinked its red error code like a stubborn child refusing to share. Alicia, one of the security guards on the graveyard shift, stood with her hands on her hips, eyeing it like she might wrestle a bag of pretzels out by force. Daniel passed her on his way to the boiler room, mop bucket sloshing with each step, but the frustration on her face made him pause. "Stuck again?" he asked, already knowing the answer. Alicia turned with a half-laugh, half-groan. "Third night this week. I just wanted a granola bar, man. Something with peanuts. Is that too much to ask at 3 in the morning?" Daniel chuckled softly and set his mop aside. "Let me take a look." He knelt down, pried off the side panel with a pocket tool he always kept in his belt pouch, and peered into the tangle of dusty wires and whirring gears. A loose sensor again, same as before. This machine was overdue for replacement, but no one upstairs would notice. Or care. A few tweaks, a soft tap on the side, and the motor clicked to life. With a mechanical whir, the metal coil turned and dropped the granola bar with a satisfying thud. "Ta-da!" Daniel said. Standing up and brushing off his knees, Alicia clapped her hands like he'd just performed a magic trick. "You're a lifesaver. Seriously." He smiled, modest. "Just don't shake it next time. Might not be so forgiving." "Noted," she said, tearing the wrapper open. "You eat yet?" Daniel glanced at the clock and shook his head. "Didn't bring anything tonight." Alicia frowned. "I'd offer you something, but—" Daniel reached into his coat pocket, pulled out a sandwich wrapped in wax paper, and held it out. "Actually, take this. I made 2. Lily didn't eat hers from lunch." "You sure?" "Positive." He smiled again, that quiet kind of smile that didn't ask for thanks. She took it reluctantly, muttering something about owing him, and Daniel just nodded and picked up his mop. Another problem solved. Another gesture that would be forgotten by morning. But he didn't do it for recognition. He did it because it was right. Because in a world that rarely noticed men like him, Daniel Carter still chose to be the kind of man his daughter would be proud of. The hum of the fluorescent light buzzed steadily overhead, casting a pale glow over the small janitor's break room. It was barely more than a converted supply closet with a cracked linoleum floor, a dented mini fridge, and a coffee maker that coughed more than it brewed. But for Lily Carter, it was a second home. She sat cross-legged on one of the mismatched chairs, a purple backpack at her feet, her school workbook open and spread across the rickety table. Her tongue peeked out slightly as she scribbled answers in her loopy handwriting, occasionally pausing to erase with a soft sigh. The math problems tonight were giving her trouble, but she didn't want to interrupt. Her daddy was out in the halls, somewhere on the 15th floor, fixing a jammed soap dispenser. Lily glanced at the clock on the wall. 8:40, 2 p.m. She knew their schedule by heart. Dad would finish that floor by 9, then check in before heading to the basement level. He always checked in. She tugged her cardigan tighter around her shoulders and returned to her workbook. Her pencil tapped against the table as she whispered the word problem aloud. If a train leaves the station at, she paused. Why do these always have trains? The door creaked open and Daniel stepped in, wiping his hands on a rag. His eyes softened the moment he saw her. How's it going, Peanut? He asked, dropping into the chair across from her. Stuck on question 6, she said, sliding the book toward him. It's one of those weird train ones. Daniel leaned in, eyes scanning the page. Ah, classic. Okay, so picture this: 2 trains, racing each other. Lily giggled. Racing? Sure. Why not? Makes it more interesting. They worked through the problem together, Daniel's explanations filled with silly analogies and dramatic sound effects that made her giggle between calculations. When she finally got the answer, she raised her pencil like a tiny champion. Boom, she said proudly. Solved. He tousled her hair, the way he always did, and stood to grab them each a cup of cocoa from the machine by the wall. It wasn't much, just instant powder and hot water, but in that moment, with the math done and her dad nearby, Lily felt like the richest girl in the world. Routine had a rhythm. Homework by fluorescent light, cocoa in paper cups, and laughter tucked into the corners of a long work night. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. Lily sat at her desk in Miss Jennings' third-grade classroom, swinging her legs under her chair as the morning sun streamed through the tall windows. Her pencil hovered above her notebook, tongue tucked into the corner of her mouth, a sign that she was deep in thought. On the whiteboard, written in bright green marker, were the day's words. Persuasive writing. Change the world with your words. Miss Jennings paced slowly across the front of the room, her warm voice filled with excitement. Think about something you care about, something you wish was different. Now ask yourself, who has the power to change it? That's who you write to. Lily tapped her pencil against the desk, eyes narrowing thoughtfully. Most of the other kids were already writing. Jacob wanted a longer recess. Maya was pleading for less homework. But Lily, her thoughts drifted to her dad. She thought about his tired eyes at the end of each night shift, about how he came home smelling like bleach and metal and still managed to pack her lunch and braid her hair before school. How he always smiled, even when they both knew their old car might not start tomorrow. Her brows furrowed in concentration. Who has the power to change things for my dad? The answer came so clearly it surprised her. The boss. Lily raised her hand. Miss Jennings, what if I don't know the name of the person I'm writing to? Miss Jennings smiled. That's okay, sweetie. Just write what you do know. Be honest. Be kind. Be brave. So Lily flipped to a clean page and wrote in big careful letters at the top, Dear CEO. And then, line by line, she poured her heart onto the page. She wrote about how her dad was the janitor in the big building downtown, how he worked hard and always helped people, even when no one said thank you, how he never asked for anything, but he deserved something better. Maybe a raise, maybe a better schedule, maybe just for someone to notice him. By the time the bell rang, Lily was still writing. She didn't want to stop not until she'd said everything she needed to. She didn't know if a letter could really change the world, but she knew it could try. The kitchen table was cluttered with crayon drawings, half-eaten toast, and a slowly drying glue stick, but Lily didn't notice any of it. She sat with her elbows resting on the wood, tongue tucked in concentration as her pencil moved carefully across the lined sheet of paper. This wasn't a school assignment anymore. This was personal. She had rewritten the beginning 3 times already, trying to make it sound just right, but now her words came more easily. They weren't fancy or full of big ideas, just true, and that felt like enough. Dear CEO, hi. My name is Lily Carter. I'm 8 years old, and I go to Eastmont Elementary. I wanted to tell you about my dad. His name is Daniel, and he works as a janitor in your building. She paused to look out the window, where her dad was tinkering with their old car again, his hands covered in grease even on his day off. He works really hard, every single night. He never complains. Even when he's really tired, or when his back hurts, or when the heater in the car doesn't work and it's freezing outside, he just keeps going. Lily bit her lip, eyes scanning what she'd written. It still didn't feel like enough. She kept going. He always says, "We'll be okay as long as we stick together." I believe him. But sometimes I wish someone would help him for once. She added a drawing in the corner of the Padgett little stick figure of her dad, holding a mop and smiling next to a big shining office building. Above it, in big bubble letters, she wrote, "The best janitor in the world. I was wondering if maybe you could give him a better job, or even just say thank you, or maybe something that makes him feel special. He deserves that." She signed it with a big curly love, Lily, and then sat back, staring at the letter like it was a wish she'd folded into paper. "What you working on?" Daniel asked as he stepped inside, wiping his hands on a towel. "Just something for school," Lily said quickly, tucking the page into her folder. She didn't know if the CEO would ever read it, but she hoped, deep down, that someone would. The Saturday air was crisp and bright, the kind of morning that made the whole neighborhood feel cleaner, sharper, like it had just been washed in sunlight. Lily clutched the envelope tightly in her mittened hands, bouncing slightly with every step as she and her dad walked down the sidewalk toward the corner mailbox. The letter was folded neatly inside, sealed with a purple sticker that said, "You got this," a leftover from her sticker book. It wasn't much, but it felt like the kind of thing you added to something important. Daniel walked beside her, sipping coffee from a paper cup, his eyes a little sleepy, but filled with quiet affection every time he glanced her way. "You sure you don't want me to read it first?" he asked, teasing gently. "Nope," Lily said, grinning. "It's a surprise. You're not allowed to know." He laughed under his breath. "All right, mystery writer, lead the way." The mailbox stood a block away, perched on the corner where the sidewalk met the main road. As they neared it, the wind picked up, just a gentle tug at first, then a sudden gust that whipped Lily's hair across her face and sent a swirl of leaves tumbling down the pavement. Before she could react, the letter was yanked from her fingers. "Hey!" she cried, spinning to chase it. The envelope fluttered like a bird caught in a storm, darting up and out over the street, past a row of parked cars, before it landed softly, miraculous lawn, the windshield of a sleek, dark sedan. The vehicle looked completely out of place on their modest street. Shiny black paint, chrome rims, tinted windows. It practically purred power, even sitting still. Lily reached the car just as a man in a charcoal coat stepped up to it, keys in hand. He paused when he saw the envelope stuck under one of the wipers, eyebrows lifting in quiet surprise. I'm sorry," Lily stammered. "That was mine." He looked down at the sticker-sealed letter, then back at her, studying her face with the kind of thoughtful curiosity grown-ups use when they're trying to understand something that doesn't quite add up. He held it out gently. "Mind if I read it?" Lily hesitated, then slowly nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "But be nice. It's for someone important." The man smiled, just barely. "I can do that." He didn't know it yet, but he was holding more than a letter. He was holding the thread that would unravel everything. Julian Black didn't believe in signs. He believed in numbers, margins, and measurable impact. He believed in performance over potential, in decisions made after midnight when the world was quiet enough to think. At 39, he had clawed his way to the top of the corporate food Chanone acquisition, one brutal negotiation at a time. The building he'd just acquired was his latest play. Another piece of real estate turned asset, the kind of tower with glass walls and weak leadership that begged for restructuring. He wasn't sentimental about it. Buildings were buildings. People were data points. But this morning, something strange happened. He'd flown in early, unannounced, planning to walk the building himself before the inevitable boardroom pleasantries. The town was smaller than he liked, too quiet. But it didn't matter. This place would turn a profit, just like the last one. His care imported, black as night, and spotless as always waited for him at the curb. Julian slid the key from his coat pocket, eyes scanning the street out of habit. But then he noticed something unusual. An envelope. Not just any envelope yon with a purple sticker that read, "You got this," in bubbly letters. It sat squarely beneath his windshield wiper, like someone had left it there just for him. He glanced around, expecting maybe a promotional flyer or some clumsy local sales pitch, but there was no logo. No return address, just a name, handwritten in careful print across the front. To the CEO, Julian frowned. He wasn't the kind of man who liked surprises, but something about the earnest handwriting stopped him. He peeled the envelope from the glass, broke the seal, and unfolded the letter. As he read, the hard line of his jaw softened. A few words in, he stopped walking. By the second paragraph, his brow furrowed. And by the time he reached the drawing, "the best janitor in the world," something deep in him shifted. It wasn't the grammar or the crayon art, it was the honesty. The kind of raw, unfiltered truth he hadn't seen in years. He slipped the letter back into the envelope with a strange care, like it was fragile, breakable. For the first time in a long time, Julian Black wasn't thinking about strategy. He was thinking about a man he'd never met, and the little girl who believed he deserved more. Julian Black didn't usually reread things. Reports, proposals, contractions was enough. Efficiency was sacred. But tonight, sitting alone in his penthouse overlooking the city skyline, the letter rested on the coffee table in front of him like it was waiting. The room around him was spotless. Every surface gleamed, every corner precise. But the letter stood out, soft edges, creased folds, a smear of graphite where Lily had erased something and rewritten it more carefully. A child's letter, scrawled in hope, sealed with a purple sticker and a belief that someone important might listen. Julian leaned forward and picked it up again. "Dear CEO, hi. My name is Lily Carter." He read it slower this time, letting each line settle. He never complains. Even when his back hurts. He always says we'll be okay as long as we stick together. He deserves something better. There was no polish to the letter, no manipulation. Just a little girl who saw something extraordinary in someone the world had clearly overlooked. Julian wasn't used to sincerity without agenda. It disarmed him. He leaned back into the leather couch, eyes drifting toward the massive windows and the city lights that never blinked. He'd built his life on reading people, knowing what they wanted before they asked, figuring out what they feared before they even realized it themselves. But this letter didn't fit into any pattern. The man Lily described, Daniel Carter? He wasn't angling for anything. He hadn't written the letter. He probably didn't even know about it. And that made it harder to ignore. Julian set the paper down again, rubbing his temple like he could shake the question from his mind. Why did it matter? He had a meeting at 7, a building to restructure. A schedule that couldn't afford distractions. But somehow, a janitor and his daughter had cracked through the noise. He stood and crossed to the bar, pouring a glass of water he barely touched. The silence in the room felt louder than usual. Because, tonight, Julian Black, a man who didn't believe in signs, couldn't stop thinking about the one letter he wasn't supposed to find, and the quiet, hard-working man it was written for. Julian arrived at the building before sunrise the next morning, slipping through the side entrance with a brisk nod to the half-asleep security guard. He wasn't dressed like a billionaire today, no tailored suit or polished shoes, just jeans, a fitted coat, and a ball cap pulled low. It helped him move without drawing attention, which was exactly what he wanted. His schedule was cleared for the morning. No meetings, no emails. Just a name, Daniel Carter. He started in the building's operations office, a narrow room tucked behind the boiler corridor where the maintenance staff clocked in and out. A supervisor named Glenn sat behind the desk, sipping coffee from a chipped mug and watching building camera feeds flicker across a small monitor. Julian kept it simple. "Hey, I'm looking for someone who works here. Janitor. Daniel Carter." Glenn raised an eyebrow, clearly not recognizing Julian without the boardroom glow. "Carter? Yeah, he's one of the good ones." "What does that mean?" Julian asked, leaning on the desk. Glenn set down his mug. "Means he shows up early, stays late, doesn't complain. Fixes things most of the guys wouldn't bother with. Helps cover shifts when people call out. And I've never once heard him raise his voice." Julian nodded slowly. "Any write-ups? Incidents?" "Not a single one in 5 years." Glenn scratched at his beard. "Kind of guy who goes unnoticed because he never causes trouble. But if something breaks, he's already fixing it before anyone calls it in." Julian mulled over the words. Unnoticed, reliable, quiet. The kind of man people rely on, then forget to thank. "Does he ever talk about his personal life?" Julian asked. "Not much. We know he's got a little girl, Lily. Sometimes brings her along on night shifts. She's polite, real sharp kid." Glenn paused. "Why are you asking, if you don't mind me saying?" Julian considered brushing off the question. But something about Glenn's open honesty made him answer, just a little. "Just curious," he said. "He seems like someone worth knowing more about." As Julian walked away, one thought settled in his mind like dust on glass. Daniel Carter wasn't just doing his job. He was holding this entire building together, and no one had really seen it. Until now. The building took on a different life at night. The polished marble floors reflected the glow of dimmed security lights, and the towering glass windows turned into mirrors of the quiet within. It was a stark contrast to the daytime buzz-no ringing phones, no rushed footsteps, no deals being whispered in conference rooms. Just the low hum of air vents and the occasional creak of old pipes settling into silence. Julian moved quietly through the halls, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. He wore dark clothes, unassuming, blending into the shadows like he didn't belong, which, in a way, he didn't. Not tonight. Tonight wasn't about ownership or oversight. It was about observation. He rounded a corner near the 12th floor and stopped. There, at the far end of the hall, Daniel Carter moved with slow, practiced precision. A mop in hand, his shoulders slightly hunched from years of labor, his expression calm and focused. He wasn't just cleaning. He was caring for the space, scrubbing, straightening, even pausing to fix a crooked painting on the wall. Julian stayed hidden in the dim alcove, watching. It wasn't the kind of surveillance he was used to. No analytics, no spreadsheets. Just human moments, quiet and ordinary, yet oddly profound. Daniel didn't rush. He didn't complain. When he spotted a small leak near the water cooler, he didn't call it in. He simply pulled out a wrench from his belt pouch and tightened the valve himself. When the elevator doors opened with a squeak, he paused, adjusted the sensor panel, and closed them gently again. There was a grace to his work, a kind of reverence. Not for the job itself, but for the dignity of doing it well. And then, just before Daniel moved to the next hallway, Julian saw something that stuck with him. Daniel reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Not the letter, a different one. A child's drawing, worn at the edges. He looked at it for a moment, a tired smile touching his face, then tucked it away and kept working. Julian stood in the dark a little longer. The weight of what he'd seen pressing gently against something in him that had been quiet for years. This wasn't just a man doing a job, this was a father fighting every day to give his daughter something better. And for the first time in a long while, Julian didn't just see an employee, he saw a story. One that deserved more than silence. Julian returned the next night, no longer out of curiosity, but out of something he couldn't quite name. Respect, maybe. Or a growing sense that he was standing at the edge of a story worth stepping into. He kept to the shadows again, following the soft rhythm of a world most people never bothered to notice. Somewhere between the 12th and 15th floors, he found Daniel again, this time crouched beside a tipped-over fruit cart outside the break room. A soft thud echoed as apples rolled across the tiled floor, bouncing off the wall and scattering under the vending machines. "Don't worry, Mrs. Gibbons." "I've got it," Daniel said gently. Julian slowed his pace. The woman, clearly in her 70s, was dressed in a cardigan too thin for the chilly building and clutched her purse like it was her lifeline. She looked flustered, cheeks pink with embarrassment. "I didn't see the edge of the cart. My shoe caught, and no harm done," Daniel said, already picking up apples with one hand and straightening the tray with the other. He moved easily, without judgment or frustration. "These things have a mind of their own. Trust me, I've wrestled worse." Mrs. Gibbons chuckled faintly. "You're too kind, Daniel. Always have been." He helped her to a nearby bench, made sure she was steady, and then just as casually dug into his coat pocket and handed her a small paper bag. "What's this?" she asked. "Extra apple from Lily's lunch," he said with a grin. "She won't notice. And I think you deserve a fresh one." Julian watched as the woman smiled, her entire face softening. No fanfare. No grand gestures. Just a man quietly doing what he always did, making things better. Later, as Daniel walked past the elevator bank, a warning chime echoed. The doors opened halfway, then jerked and stalled. Without hesitation, Daniel knelt beside the panel, unscrewing it with his pocket tool. A pair of nearby employees cleaning staff watched nervously. "You sure you should mess with that?" one asked. Daniel just smiled. "If I don't, it'll stay stuck all night. Someone might get hurt." 10 minutes later, the elevator dinged softly and opened with smooth ease. The cleaning staff clapped quietly. Daniel gave a small shrug. "Just needs a little attention." Julian lingered in the hallway, unseen. And for the first time in a very long while, he felt small not in power, but in perspective. In this building full of titles and nameplates, the man with none of those things had just shown the most leadership. The hum of the floor buffer echoed through the hallway as Daniel guided it in steady arcs, the smell of lemon polish lingering in the air. It was nearly midnight, and most of the building had long since emptied. Just the occasional flicker of a motion sensor light or the shuffle of the late-night security crew reminded him he wasn't entirely alone. He'd just unplugged the buffer when he heard footsteps, sharp, purposeful, not like the usual half-asleep janitorial shuffle. Daniel turned, expecting Glenn or maybe Alicia dropping in for a coffee. Instead, it was someone unfamiliar. Tall, sharply dressed even in dark jeans and a fitted jacket, the man didn't belong to the usual late-shift crowd. He carried himself like someone used to being listened to even in silence. Daniel straightened instinctively, wiping his palms on his uniform. "Daniel Carter?" the man asked. Daniel blinked. "That's me." The man stepped closer, stopping just short of an arm's reach. "Julian Black." Daniel paused. The name rang a bell, faint but distinct, an email he'd glimpsed on an executive memo. Blackstone Properties, the new owner. "Oh," Daniel said slowly. "Right. You're the boss." Julian didn't smile, but something in his expression softened. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a slightly worn envelope, the purple sticker still clinging to the corner. "She wrote this," Julian said. "Your daughter." Daniel's eyes locked on the letter. He didn't speak. For a moment, all the motion left him, like someone had hit pause. "I found it on my car," Julian added. "Didn't mean to read it, but I did." and I haven't stopped thinking about it since." Daniel finally exhaled, rubbing the back of his neck. She was supposed to mail it. I didn't know she actually—" His voice trailed off, equal parts touched and mortified. "I hope she's not in trouble," he added quickly. "She's got a good heart, just sometimes she thinks too big." Julian's gaze didn't waver. Thinking big isn't a flaw, neither is being seen. Daniel looked away, the letter still clutched in Julian's hand. He wasn't used to being noticed. Not like this. "She wrote all that?" he asked, quieter now. "About me?" Julian nodded. "Every word." Daniel laughed softly, almost shyly. "Well, guess I've got a lot to live up to." And in that moment, under flickering office lights and the quiet buzz of the empty floor, two very different men stood facing each other, connected by the truth of a little girl's words, and neither of their lives would be the same again. The break room was quiet, lit by the soft flicker of a buzzing overhead light and the dull blue glow from the vending machine. It smelled faintly of stale coffee and lemon cleaner, nothing fancy, but it was warm, and for now it was enough. Daniel poured hot water from the kettle into two mismatched mugs, one bearing a faded cartoon bear, the other chipped on the rim. "Sorry," he said with a sheepish shrug. "No espresso bar down here, but the tea's decent. I think it's peppermint." Julian, still in his tailored coat, accepted the mug without hesitation. "I've had worse." They sat at the small table, near the microwave, knees almost bumping. The room, cramped and worn, seemed to fold in around them, making the silence feel more personal than awkward. Julian glanced at the letter, now folded neatly, and resting on the table between them. "She thinks the world of you, you know." Daniel gave a small, almost shy smile. "Lily's got a generous imagination." "I don't think so," Julian replied. "I've been asking around. People respect you. They rely on you." Daniel stirred his tea with a plastic spoon, watching the steam rise. "I just do the work. Most of the time, no one notices, which, to be honest, is kind of the point." Julian tilted his head slightly. "Why's that?" Daniel hesitated, then leaned back in his chair. "Because it's not about being noticed. It's about showing up, doing what needs to be done. The floors don't mop themselves, the trash doesn't walk out. Someone's got to care about the little things, or the big things fall apart." Julian studied him, his business-trained mind trying to reconcile this quiet man with the way the building functioned like a machine and how this janitor seemed to know exactly where the gears were wearing thin. "You've thought a lot about this," he said. Daniel chuckled softly. "Well, you spend enough nights with a mop and no one to talk to, you start thinking about everything." Julian nodded slowly, more impressed than he cared to admit. Daniel didn't speak like a man with a fancy degree, but he spoke with clarity, purpose, and heart. And Julian knew the difference. As they sipped tea in silence, Julian realized something unexpected. He'd come to meet a janitor, but he was sitting across from a man who understood people better than most executives he'd ever hired, and that intrigued him. The tea had long gone cold, but neither man had moved. The break room buzzed with silence, broken only by the faint hum of the vending machine cooling half-empty rows of snacks. Julian sat with his elbows on the table, fingers steepled, studying Daniel like a man trying to solve a puzzle that refused to fit its box. "You ever think about doing something else?" Julian asked suddenly. Daniel blinked. "Like, other than scrubbing floors?" Julian nodded. "Yeah, something bigger." Daniel gave a low chuckle, not unkind. "Sure, every now and then. Usually around 3 a.m., when the mop handle's giving me blisters." He paused, then added, "But dreams don't pay rent. And Lily likes to eat, so I stick to what's steady." Julian leaned forward, a spark in his eyes now. "What if I offered you something steady and different?" Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Different? How?" Julian reached into his coat and pulled out a small notepad, flipping to a page he'd scrawled on earlier. "This building, this company is broken in ways the top floor can't see. Processes that don't work. People who don't feel heard. Morale, that's on life support, and you want me to fix it? Daniel asked, skeptical. I want you to observe, give feedback, be honest, talk to people, see what's broken. I don't want a sanitized report. I want the truth from someone who lives in the gears of this place. Julian's tone was calm, deliberate. Call it a trial run, consultant for internal culture and operations. Temporary. You'll keep your pay, maybe a little more. No title, no pressure, just your perspective. Daniel stared at him. I'm not trained for that. Julian shrugged. You're already doing it. I just want to make it official. Daniel leaned back, unsure whether to laugh or feel insulted. You're asking a janitor to fix a company from the bottom up? I'm asking a man who sees everything and says nothing to finally speak, Julian said. The room held still for a moment. Daniel looked down at his calloused hands, then toward the letter still folded on the table between them. Lily's words echoed in his mind. He works really hard and never complains. He swallowed. You really think this'll help? Julian nodded. Only if you say yes. Daniel took a breath, slow and measured. Well, guess I'd better sleep on it. But even as he said it, something deep inside him stirred a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. The next evening, the building felt colder somehow. Not just from the chill in the air, but from the weight of a decision still lingering in Daniel's chest like a stone that wouldn't settle. He moved through his routine on autopilot, collecting trash bags, wiping down counters, buffing floors with practiced precision. The kind of rhythm that came from years of repetition, from knowing that if you kept your head down and did the work, the world would mostly leave you alone. But tonight, the silence didn't comfort him. It pressed in. Julian's offer had followed him home, riding quietly in the back seat as Lily talked about her science project and sang along with the radio. It had sat across the dinner table while they ate mac and cheese and watched cartoons. And it had stared at him as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering what it would feel like to say yes. But this morning, as he tied Lily's shoes and packed her lunch, he made up his mind. No. Not because he didn't want more. Not because he didn't wonder sometimes late at night what it would feel like to wear something other than a uniform with his name stitched in red thread. But because people like him didn't take risks. Not when a child depended on him. Not when rent came due and tires went bald and every week carried just enough hope to survive the next. So when Julian found him again, this time in the utility closet on the 14th floor, Daniel was ready. I thought about it, he said before Julian could even speak. Julian studied him quietly. And? Daniel shook his head. I appreciate the offer. I really do, but I've got a good thing going. The hours work. The benefits keep Lily in checkups, and I don't need to mess with what's already stable. You'd be helping people, Julian said. I help people now, Daniel replied, not unkindly. I just do it without a business card. Julian's jaw tensed, but he nodded. I understand. Daniel offered a small smile, though his heart didn't quite match it. Some of us don't get to chase more. Some of us just have to make sure the lights stay on, and with that, he turned back to his cart, heart heavy, but convinced he'd made the right call. Safe was safe. And safe, for now, was enough, wasn't it? The kitchen smelled faintly of toast and overripe bananas as the morning sun slipped in through the thin curtains. Lily sat at the table in her polka-dot pajamas, swinging her legs beneath the chair, spooning cereal into her mouth with half her attention. The other half was on her dad, who was unusually quiet as he stood at the counter pouring coffee that he hadn't yet sipped. She tilted her head. You're thinking really loud. Daniel looked up, caught. He smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. Am I? Yep, she said, crunching down on a mouthful. Is it about work? He hesitated, then gave in. Kinda. Lily pushed her bowl aside, suddenly more serious. Did the CEO get my letter? Daniel nodded. He did, Julian, that's his name. Her eyes widened. Really? What did he say? Daniel sat across from her, resting his arms on the table. He offered me a different job, just for a little while. Said I'd help him understand what's wrong with the company from someone who actually sees it. Lily's eyes lit up. That's amazing. Daniel smiled, then looked away. I said no. The sparkle in her eyes faltered. Why? Because it's a big change, kiddo. It's not guaranteed. What if it doesn't work out? What if it means less time with you? Or no job at all? He sighed. I've spent your whole life making sure things are safe and steady. Lily was quiet for a moment. Then she climbed out of her chair, walked over, and wrapped her small arms around his waist. You always tell me to be brave, she said softly. You say it when I'm scared to raise my hand in class or when I think I'll mess up my spelling test. Daniel closed his eyes. Now it's your turn, Daddy, she whispered. Be brave. Try. He knelt to her level, his hands on her shoulders, searching her little face, the face that looked more like her mom's every day. And, in that moment, he realized something terrifying and beautiful. Lily believed in him more than he ever had. He didn't answer right away, just pulled her into a hug and held her tightly. But by the time the morning light reached the kitchen floor, his heart had shifted. And for the first time in years, Daniel Carter was ready to take a leap. Daniel Carter stood in front of the towering glass doors of Blackstone's executive wing, his reflection staring back at him, button-down shirt slightly wrinkled, tie askew, work boots freshly scrubbed but still stained from years of mopping floors. He tugged at his collar, cleared his throat, and stepped inside. The change was immediate. Gone were the bleach-scented hallways and buzzing utility lights. Here, the floors gleamed like water. Art hung from the walls that probably cost more than his car. Sleek furniture. Echoes of laughter from people who hadn't worked a night shift in their lives. Daniel felt like he'd walked onto another planet. He clutched the plain manila folder Julian had given him. Just observe. Be honest. Write down what you notice. That was the job. It didn't feel like a real one. More like a dream that hadn't decided if it would be kind or cruel. A young assistant greeted him at the reception desk with a wide, practiced smile. Mr. Carter? Julian's expecting you. Conference room C, down the hall and to the left. Daniel nodded and mumbled a thank you, resisting the urge to retreat back to the comfort of a mop and bucket. He found the room easily enough. Inside, 6 sharply dressed executives sat around a long table, each with a tablet or laptop open. They barely looked up as he entered. Julian, seated at the head of the table, offered a nod. Morning, Daniel. Everyone, this is Mr. Carter. He's joining us in a consulting capacity. Brings a different kind of perspective. Someone cleared their throat. A man with slick-back hair and a designer watch glanced up, unimpressed. A consultant? From maintenance? The words stung more than Daniel expected, but he forced a smile. Custodial services, technically, but yeah. Julian didn't flinch. Exactly. The ground floor's where the truth lives. That's why he's here. The meeting rolled on. Filled with acronyms Daniel didn't recognize and phrases like internal realignment strategy and Q3 cross-functional synergy. He scribbled notes he barely understood and watched how people talked fast, defensive, always selling. By the end of the hour, his head ached, but as he stepped out into the hallway, he paused and glanced down at one small line he'd jotted in the margin of his notepad. No one's listening. Everyone's performing. It wasn't much, but it was a start, and for Daniel Carter, it was the first brick in something entirely new. Daniel sat in the corner of the conference room again the next morning. Same seat, same coffee he didn't really like, same awkward tie he was starting to resent. He hadn't said much far mostly watched, listened, took notes in the quiet way he always had. But something was starting to take shape in his mind. A thread he couldn't stop tugging. Today's meeting was about workflow optimization. The executives circled charts and tossed out jargon like confetti. Cross, departmental lag, inefficient cascade protocols, initiative misalignment. The language was polished, the tone confident. But it all sounded hollow to Daniel, like a fancy way of avoiding the real issue. Julian glanced at him halfway through. "You've been quiet, Carter. Anything stand out?" Daniel looked up slowly, his pen still in hand. He hesitated. The air felt different, now waiting, judging. "Well," he began, choosing his words carefully, "you've got a lot of people talking about efficiency from behind desks. But no one's talking to the people actually doing the work." A few heads turned. A couple eyebrows lifted. Daniel sat up straighter. "You've got staff entering duplicate data into two systems that don't talk to each other. I saw an intake clerk yesterday retyping the same information into 3 different databases." She said it's always been like that. Silence settled in the room. The man with the designer watch narrowed his eyes. "You're saying our process is broken because a clerk retypes data?" Daniel shrugged. "I'm saying you've got a line of folks downstairs doing triple the work for a single result, and nobody upstairs seems to know or care because they don't ask. They just measure outputs and ignore bottlenecks that waste hours a day." Julian leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "And how would you fix it?" "Talk to the people who do the job. Ask what's slowing them down. Make one system that works instead of 3 that don't." It was so simple it sounded absurd. And yet, no one had said it before. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, Julian nodded, slow and impressed. Noted. Daniel didn't puff up or smile. He just went back to his notes, underlining the line he'd added that morning. "When you listen at the bottom, you fix the top." Maybe he wasn't fluent in corporate speak, but truth? That he understood just fine. The ballroom shimmered under a chandelier that looked like it could power a small city. Laughter floated over the clink of wine glasses, and servers in starched uniforms glided between clusters of guests, offering hors d'oeuvres on silver trays. The crowd was polished, dressed in midnight suits and gowns like liquid light. Daniel Carter tugged at his thrift store blazer and felt the sweat creeping beneath his collar. "This is not my scene," he muttered under his breath. Julian, standing beside him in a crisp, tailored tuxedo, sipped from a glass of something expensive and arched a brow. "You're not here to fit in," he said. "You're here to be you." Daniel gave a quiet snort. "Yeah, well, me usually comes with a mop." Julian just smirked. "That's the point. The event was a fundraiser-own of those high-profile, look-good-while-doing-good affairs, full of people who made deals with smiles and compliments sharpened like knives." Julian had insisted Daniel come along. "Perspective," he'd said. "They need to see what real looks like." Daniel had wanted to say no, but Lily had beamed when he told her. "You'll be amazing," she'd whispered, slipping one of her glittery stickers into his wallet. For luck. So here he was, holding a glass of water and trying not to knock over a table. He was awkward at first. Polite nods. One-word answers. But then someone asked what he did, and without thinking, he told the truth. "I clean floors, fix what's broken, make sure things run so other people don't have to think about them." The woman blinked. "You're joking?" Daniel shook his head. "Not at all." She moved on quickly. But a man nearby, a CFO from another firm, turned with genuine interest. "Wait, you're that Daniel Carter?" By the third conversation, Daniel had stopped trying to blend in. He started telling stories about broken elevators and late-night tea, about people doing hard work with no spotlight and no stage. And slowly, the circle around him grew. Not because he was charming or clever or dressed for the room, but because his honesty cut through the noise like a clear bell. Julian watched from across the floor, expression unreadable. But deep down, he knew. Champagne had its place. Tonight, though? Coffee and, a man like Daniel Carter was, what they'd remember. By week 3, Daniel Carter knew more about the company than most of the people who had worked there for years. Not because he had access to spreadsheets or sat in strategy meetings, but because he listened. Really listened. He still wore his work boots, still carried a notepad in his back pocket. But something had shifted. Word had spread quietly, organically, that Daniel was someone you could talk to. Someone who didn't just nod and forget your name 5 minutes later. On the 5th floor, he spent an hour talking to Marissa, a payroll clerk who confessed she hadn't taken a lunch break in 2 months because of a bug in the new scheduling system. On the 8th, he helped a maintenance guy figure out how to reroute a leaking HVAC line, then stayed to mop up the water, even though it wasn't his job anymore. He didn't lead with a title. Didn't need to. People opened up to him in hallways, elevators, even stairwells. They told him things they'd never say in meetings, small frustrations, missed opportunities, broken routines that no one upstairs seemed to notice. And Daniel took it all in, jotting quiet notes, asking questions, circling back later to see if anything had changed. Then, in boardrooms where people still seemed surprised to see him, he repeated what he'd heard, not as complaints, as insight. Your customer service reps aren't lazy, they're burned out because their call software freezes 3 times an hour, he explained one morning. And your janitorial team has to redo floors because someone swapped cleaning vendors without checking the product specs. He didn't shame, he didn't scold. He just told the truth with the same quiet steadiness he'd used to clean this building for 5 years. Julian watched it happen with something like awe. Executives started asking Daniel to sit in on department check-ins. Employees started looping him in before decisions were made. He wasn't just a consultant anymore, he was a bridge, the whisperer between suits and sweat, the translator between boardroom ambition and boots-on-the-ground reality. And Daniel? He still packed Lily's lunch every morning, still kissed her forehead and said, "Be kind, work hard." Only now. He was living those words in a way that was changing everything around him. One honest conversation at a time. The living room smelled of vanilla cake and apple juice, a happy kind of chaos swirling around streamers, balloons, and the sound of 8-year-olds giggling over party hats and paper crowns. Lily's birthday had arrived, and their tiny apartment, usually quiet and filled with the hum of old appliances, now pulsed with laughter, crayon drawings, and half-blown-up balloons clinging to the ceiling. Daniel had spent the whole morning making it special. He'd baked the cake, himself slightly lopsided but full of heart, and transformed their space into a kingdom of cardboard castles and plastic tiaras. There were no hired entertainers, no glittery bounce houses, just neighborhood kids, homemade snacks, and the kind of joy you can't buy. Then the knock came. Daniel opened the door to find Julian standing there in a charcoal coat, looking faintly out of place with a wrapped box under his arm and a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. "Hope I'm not crashing," Julian said. Daniel blinked. "You made it. You said 3 o'clock. It's 3:01, Julian replied, offering the box. "For Lily." Lily spotted him from across the room and ran over, eyes wide. "You came!" Julian crouched down, holding out the gift. "Happy birthday, Lily." She tore into the silver wrapping like a whirlwind, revealing a sleek tablet with a child-safe case latest model, with more bells and whistles than she'd ever imagined. Her jaw dropped. "Whoa," one of the kids whispered. Daniel stepped in gently. "Say thank you, sweetheart." "Thank you," she beamed. "This is the coolest thing ever." Julian smiled, a little stunned by how much joy that one gift had sparked. But then, as the noise settled and cake was served, Daniel stepped forward with a different kind of gift. A hand-bound book, made with cardstock, markers, and pages stitched together with bright blue thread. The cover read, "The Adventures of Lily the Brave." He knelt beside her, handed it over, and smiled. "Thought you might like a story about a girl who changes the world." Lily opened it, eyes tracing each lovingly drawn page, Lily riding dragons, helping kings, solving riddles. Her laugh was quieter now, awed, moved. "This is me," she whispered. "Every bit of it," Daniel said. Julian watched in silence as she hugged the book to her chest, the tablet momentarily forgotten on the table. And in that moment, surrounded by paper crowns and the smell of birthday candles, he saw it what Lily had always known. Love didn't come in boxes. It came in time, and effort, and stories written by hand. The party had wound down. The last of the kids had been picked up, the balloons were drooping, and Daniel stood in the kitchen scraping frosting off paper plates while Lily curled up on the couch, her handmade book cradled like treasure in her arms. Julian lingered in the doorway, jacket slung over one shoulder, eyes scanning the worn apartment walls. It wasn't pity in his expression, just quiet thought. The kind that came from seeing something familiar, something buried deep. "You want a coffee?" Daniel asked, drying his hands. Julian hesitated, then nodded. "Sure, if you're offering." They sat at the small table, sipping from mismatched mugs, the kind of silence that stretched comfortably now, built from a few weeks of shared understanding and strange friendship. Daniel didn't press, but something in Julian's gaze told him the man was balancing on the edge of saying something he hadn't said in a long time. "You know," Julian started, staring down into his cup. "This place, the noise, the paper streamers, the handmade everything. It reminded me of my 7th birthday." Daniel looked up. "Yeah?" Julian nodded slowly. "My foster mom, Linda. She didn't have much, but she made spaghetti and cut up old magazines to make a happy birthday sign, taped it to the wall with bandages because we didn't have any Scotch tape." He chuckled softly. "I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen." Daniel smiled. "Sounds like someone who really cared." "She did. One of the few who did." Julian swirled the coffee in his mug. "I bounced around a lot. 17 homes, between the ages of 4 and 18. I learned early that no one was going to hand me anything, so I built my life like a fortress. Cold, clean, safe." He glanced toward Lily, still asleep, her fingers curled around the corner of her book. "But that letter? That girl? It cracked something open." Daniel didn't speak. He just listened, letting the words land where they needed to. "I think that's why I couldn't stop thinking about you," Julian admitted. "Not because of her letter, but because I know what it means to be invisible, to work twice as hard just to stand in the same room." Daniel looked at him then, really looked. Not at the tailored clothes or expensive watch, but at the boy behind the man. "You built something real, Julian," he said quietly. Julian shook his head. "Not yet, but maybe I'm starting to." And for the first time in a very long while, the man who had everything realized he still had something left to build. Something that mattered more than any skyscraper or bottom line. Something human. The headline broke just before dawn. Blackstone CEO linked to layoffs. Ignored worker warnings. By the time Julian stepped into the office, his phone was buzzing nonstop, emails stacking like dominoes, and the PR team was already in a panic. The article wasn't entirely accurate, but the optics were bad. It painted Julian as the out-of-touch billionaire who sipped espresso while hundreds of jobs dangled over a cliff. He stormed into the glass-walled boardroom, jaw tight, sleeves rolled, tension radiating off him like heat. The execs were already seated, rapid-firing spin ideas. "We release a statement saying it's a restructuring plan. Blame it on outdated systems. Emphasize growth potential. People love buzzwords." Julian didn't say anything at first. He just stood, arms crossed, eyes distant. Then, almost like instinct, he turned and walked out, downstairs, past the polished floors, the chatter, the frantic calls until he found Daniel on the mezzanine, refilling the water cooler for the 3rd time that day. Julian stopped, hands on his hips. "They want me to spin it." Daniel looked up, brow furrowed. "You mean lie with style?" Julian smirked, despite himself. "Something like that." "What actually happened?" Daniel asked, wiping his hands with a rag. Julian exhaled. "We flagged inefficiencies. We planned cuts, temporary ones. We were going to retrain and rehire, but someone leaked it half-baked, and now it looks like I don't care." Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You want to fix this?" Julian nodded. "Of course." "Then stop hiding." Julian blinked. "What do you mean? Tell the truth. Get in front of it. Own the mistake, not the PR spin. Say you should have communicated better. Say you're not proud of how it looks. Then show them what you're actually doing to fix it. Real names, real jobs." Real stories. Julian studied him. You think that'll work? Daniel shrugged. Maybe, maybe not. But people know the difference between damage control and honesty. You start with honesty, you earn your way back. It wasn't business school advice. It wasn't strategic or polished. But it was right. Later that day, Julian stood in front of cameras with no script, no talking points. Just Daniel's words in his head and the truth in his voice. The fallout didn't vanish. But the tide shifted. Not because Julian said what people wanted to hear, but because he said what was real. The offer came quietly, over black coffee in Julian's office. No fanfare, no audience, just two men sitting across from each other, the skyline burning orange behind them as the sun dipped low. I want to make it official, Julian said, sliding a crisp folder across the desk. You've done more for this company in a few months than most of my VPs have in years. Daniel stared at the folder. His name was printed neatly on the label, Daniel Carter, Director of Culture and Operations Integration. That's a lot of words, Daniel muttered, half smiling. It's a lot of trust, Julian said. You'd have a real seat at the table, budget access, authority to fix what's broken, not just observe it, full salary, benefits, the works. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. That's not a job you give to a guy who still wears steel-toe boots to meetings, Julian leaned forward. That's exactly who you give it to. The news spread fast. By the time Daniel stepped into the break room the next day just to say hi, just to grab a soda, he could feel the shift in the air. Glenn barely made eye contact. Alicia gave him a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. So, she said, arms crossed, they give you a desk now? Daniel blinked. I'm still me, Alicia. Sure, she said. Just me with a corner office. He looked around at the people he'd worked beside for years. People who'd shared midnight shifts and vending machine dinners. People who'd trusted him. And now, they looked at him like he was someone else. I didn't ask for this, he said quietly. But you took it, Glenn replied from behind a mop bucket. Can't blame you. Just don't forget where you came from. Daniel didn't answer. Because deep down, he knew they were right to be wary. Change came with shadows. And even the best intentions could cast them. That night Daniel sat at his kitchen table, Lily coloring beside him, the unopened promotion folder resting between them like a question that hadn't been fully answered. Are you happy? She asked, without looking up. He stared at the folder, then at her. I don't know yet, he said honestly. Because building something new was never easy, especially when you had to do it without losing who you used to be. The email hit like a punch to the gut. It arrived just after noon, marked Confidential Internal Review. Daniel read the subject line twice before opening it, his stomach tightening with each click. Inside was a formal notice from HR. An anonymous complaint had been filed against him. The accusation? Misrepresentation of credentials. Specifically, that he had falsified his background to land his consulting role and, now, his pending executive promotion. He sat frozen at his desk, the screen's cold glow reflecting off the polished nameplate that still felt strange to see. Daniel Carter, Consultant, Office of Culture and Integration. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure what to say, unsure if there was even a way to respond. Falsified credentials? He hadn't claimed anything, hadn't submitted a resume. Julian had pulled him out of the maintenance wing because of a letter written in crayon and the honesty of his own words. There were no degrees, no business certificates, just experience, just trust. And now that trust was under fire. By mid-afternoon, whispers were floating through the upper floors. Polite nods from colleagues had become curious glances, eyes lingering too long. A few execs passed him in the hallway with tight smiles and clipped greetings. He heard the word unqualified tossed casually by someone who didn't realize he was within earshot. In the janitor's loungeance, his haven things were no better. Guess we should all write letters now, someone muttered. Daniel didn't respond. He couldn't. Because the truth was, this wasn't just about him. It was about Lily. About everything he'd built since the day he buried her mother and promised he'd raise their daughter with dignity, no matter the cost. Now that promise felt like it was slipping through his fingers. Julian was out of town, unreachable, and Daniel sat alone in the middle of his borrowed office, blinds half drawn, hands folded tightly in his lap. He hadn't lied. He hadn't cheated. He'd simply been showed up, worked hard, spoke truth. But now, the world of suits and titles was demanding something else. Proof. Paper. Pedigree. And Daniel Carter, who had nothing but integrity and a father's love, suddenly had everything to lose. The auditorium was packed. Employees from every floor, every department, filled the rows pressed shoulder to shoulder under soft, dimmed lighting. Word had spread fast. There'd be a company-wide town hall. Julian Black would speak. Rumors swirled like smoke about cuts, changes, scandal about Daniel Carter. Daniel stood off stage, just behind the curtain, his heart thudding in his chest like a warning drum. He hadn't wanted to come, but Julian had called him that morning, voice low, steady. Be there. Just trust me. He wasn't sure if he had trust left to give. On stage, Julian stepped up to the mic in a simple black sweater-no suit today. No power tie. He looked out at the room and waited. The murmurs died. Silence settled. I want to address the rumors, he began, voice even. And I want to do it plainly. A hush fell across the room like a breath held. Yes, a complaint was filed against Daniel Carter, alleging that he misrepresented himself to gain a position within this company. Julian paused, gaze sharp. Let me be clear. He didn't. He reached into his pocket, unfolding a sheet of paper with deliberate care. This, he said, holding it up, is the only resume Daniel Carter ever gave me. It's a letter, written in pencil, on wide-ruled paper, by his daughter. A ripple ran through the room. Julian began to read. Dear CEO, hi. My name is Lily Carter. I wanted to tell you about my dad. His voice didn't waver as he spoke each word. He read the whole letter, every line, of simple, aching honesty. The part about the broken heater. The part about he never complains. The part about he deserves something better. When he finished, Julian folded the letter carefully and returned it to his pocket. This company has survived on polish and pretense. Daniel Carter reminded us what it means to lead with substance. With heart. He looked out across the crowd. So, if anyone's still wondering whether he belongs here, I'd ask you to look at what's improved in the last 3 months. And ask yourselves how that happened. A silence followed, not empty but full. Then, slowly, applause began. A single clap, then another. And then the room rose, wave after wave of people standing, clapping, until the sound filled every corner of the building. Behind the curtain, Daniel stood frozen, tears burning the backs of his eyes. Not because he needed saving, but because someone had finally seen the truth and spoken it out loud. And that made all the difference. The elevator ride to the 20th floor felt longer than usual. Daniel stood alone, hands in his coat pockets, staring at the illuminated numbers as they ticked upward. He hadn't asked Julian for names, didn't need to. The whisper trails in the building were easy enough to follow if you knew how to listen. And Daniel Carter had always listened. When the doors slid open, he stepped into the executive suite. Sleek, cold, designed for power plays and closed-door decisions. Down the hall, behind a half-open office door, sat Carter Lennox, Senior Operations Director, polished, calculated. One of the first to scoff when Julian had brought Daniel into the room. One of the only ones who never stopped. Daniel knocked once. Lennox looked up, clearly not expecting him. Carter, surprised you're still walking the halls. Daniel stepped inside and closed the door gently. I know it was you. Lennox leaned back in his chair, face unreadable. I have no idea what you're talking about. Don't bother, Daniel said, voice calm. You filed the complaint. You thought if you painted me as unqualified, I'd back out before the board finalized the promotion. A pause. Just long enough for truth to rise between them, Lennox exhaled, folding his arms. "You're a janitor, Carter. You don't belong in strategy meetings. You don't have the education, the pedigree. You walk in here with your soft-spoken charm and your mop-handle philosophy, and people eat it up like gospel." Daniel didn't flinch. "You're not threatened by what I know. You're threatened by what I see. That people matter, that listening works, that leadership isn't just degrees and buzzwords, it's trust." Lennox's eyes narrowed. "You think you're better than me?" Daniel shook his head. "No, I think I'm different, and that's what scares you." The room was thick with tension, but Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You could have come to me," he said quietly, "but you tried to tear me down instead." He turned to leave, then paused. "Here's the thing, Lennox. I built trust by telling the truth. You tried to build power by hiding it. We'll see which lasts longer." And with that, he walked out, leaving Lennox alone in his glass office, surrounded by reflections but no real connection. For Daniel, the moment wasn't about revenge, it was about claiming his place, without apology, without fear, because he finally knew who he was, and no title, no lie, could take that away. The call came just after midnight. Daniel jolted awake to the sound of coughing down the hall, raw and relentless. He was on his feet before his eyes had fully opened, rushing into Lily's room. She lay curled beneath her blankets, her forehead damp with sweat, her breath shallow and quick. Her cheeks were flushed red, her tiny hands clutching the edges of her bedsheet. "Dad," she croaked, voice paper thin. "My tummy hurts." Daniel crouched beside her bed, brushing her hair gently back. "I've got you, sweetheart. I'm right here." By morning, she was burning with fever, too weak to sit up. The pediatrician's office squeezed them in first thing. "A virus," they said. "A rough one. It would pass, but not quickly, and not without rest, fluids, and constant care." Daniel canceled everything. Meetings, calls, even an invite to sit in on a major company presentation with Julian. He sent one short message. "Lily's sick. I won't be in. I'll keep you posted." No explanation, no apology. He didn't need to give one. He made a bed on the couch beside her. Measured out medicine. Refilled her water every hour. Read The Adventures of Lily the Brave in soft whispers while she drifted in and out of sleep. For 3 straight days he barely slept, barely ate, barely left her side. News of his absence filtered through the building. Some wondered if he'd stepped back under pressure. Others speculated quietly, was he overwhelmed? Was it all too much? But Julian knew the truth. He didn't call, didn't text. Just sent a single care package. Lily's favorite cookies, a soft blanket, and a note in Julian's neat handwriting. "A good company survives on leadership. A great one makes space for fathers to be fathers. We've got things handled, be where it matters." Daniel read the note twice, eyes blurring. He folded it carefully and tucked it beside the book Lily clutched in her sleep. Because in the end, titles could wait. Meetings could wait. The world could spin on without him for a few days. But Lily? She only had one dad. And no matter how far he climbed, Daniel Carter knew one thing above all else. He was a father first. Always. The building was still when Daniel arrived, just after midnight, just like it used to be. The echo of his footsteps down the long, polished hallway felt like a memory made real. He wasn't in a suit. No clipboard, no nameplate. Just an old work shirt with faded lettering and his sturdy steel-toe boots, worn in all the right places. He made his way down to the basement level, the hum of the vending machines and the faint scent of industrial cleaner greeting him like old friends. The janitor's closet door creaked the same way it always had. Inside, the shelves were still cluttered, the mop bucket still stubborn, the small radio on the shelf still tuned to the same easy listening station. Daniel smiled. He pulled on a pair of gloves and filled the bucket. No ceremony, no spotlight. Just muscle memory and the quiet rhythm of doing a job that mattered more than most people ever noticed. One floor at a time, he moved through the building, wiped down the elevators, scrubbed the lobby tile until it gleamed, Took his time with the break room. He remembered who used to nap on that couch during their 15-minute breaks. He left a fresh pack of coffee beside the old machine, just like he used to when someone had a rough week. He didn't tell anyone he was coming. He didn't need to. At around 3 a.m., Alicia found him in the stairwell, hands red from the cold bucket water. "You lost?" she asked, a hint of a grin playing at her lips. Daniel looked up. "Just passing through." She crossed her arms. "You know you don't have to do this anymore." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm doing it." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of shared years between them. Then she nodded, and that was enough. Later, he left a note on the janitor's bulletin board. "No job is too small, no role too low. Thank you for building this place from the ground, up quietly, faithfully. You are seen. D.C. Before sunrise." Daniel slipped out the side entrance boots, muddy, hands sore, heart full. Because sometimes, to move forward, you had to touch the ground that first held you. And Daniel Carter never wanted to forget where he came from. The announcement came on a rainy Tuesday morning, quietly, without grandeur, but with a weight that rippled through the entire company like a breath finally released. In a glass-walled conference room on the top floor, Julian stood at the head of the table, sleeves rolled up, his voice calm but steady. Around him sat executives, HR leads, department heads, some skeptical, some curious, a few already nodding before he spoke. "We've spent a lot of time talking about what kind of company we want to be," he began. "Productive, profitable, respected, but none of that means anything if we don't start with people." He turned to the side, gesturing toward the man seated next to him. Jeans, plain shirt, no pretense. "Daniel Carter has reminded us of that." A few heads turned, whispers passed like wind through leaves. Daniel shifted in his seat, uncomfortable with the attention but grounded in it all the same. "He didn't apply for this role," Julian continued. "He didn't ask for it. But over the past few months, he's done more to unite our teams, fix what's broken, and rebuild trust than any restructure ever could." Julian paused, then looked Daniel in the eye. "Today, I'm naming him Director of Culture and P.O. Plano because of his credentials, but because of his character. Because in a company that forgot how to listen, he reminded us how. There was a silence that followed, not the awkward kind, but the kind that meant something. Then came the applause. Not thunderous, but genuine. Earned." Daniel stood slowly, hands slightly shaking, heart thudding in his chest. He looked out at the room and cleared his throat. "I don't have a business degree," he said simply. "I don't know all the lingo, but I know people. I know what it feels like to not be seen. And I know that a title doesn't mean much if you forget who you were before you had it." He let the words settle, then nodded. "Let's build something that makes people proud to work here. Not just proud to say they work here." Julian smiled, the kind of smile that comes when the right choice confirms itself. And just like that, a janitor became a cornerstone, not with polish, but with purpose. And the company began to change for good. The stage lights were warm and sharp, casting long shadows across the gleaming auditorium. Hundreds of attendees filled the rouse, investors, CEOs, analysts, media, all waiting, all expecting strategy, innovation, maybe a new merger announcement. Instead, Julian Black stood alone at the podium, no slides behind him, no charts or bullet points. Just a single folded letter in his hand. He'd spoken at dozens of conferences over the years, usually with polish, precision, and a well-rehearsed plan. But today, he wasn't here to impress. He was here to tell the truth. "I used to think leadership was about control," he began, voice calm, even. "Structure, planning, efficiency. I built my empire on margins and metrics, thinking, if I could measure it, I could manage it." A few nods, silent agreement. This was what they expected. Then he paused. "But a few months ago, something happened that I couldn't measure." He held up the letter. "This was found under my windshield on a cold Saturday morning. It's not from an executive or a consultant. It's from an 8-year-old girl. Her name is Lily Carter. The room stilled. She wrote to the CEO of a company, my company, not to ask for money or attention or favors. She asked for kindness, for dignity, for someone to notice her father, Daniel Carter, who worked as a janitor in one of our buildings. Julian unfolded the page with care and began to read it aloud. Her handwriting, her crayon drawing, her simple words filled the air with something far more powerful than numbers ever could. He never complains. He works hard every night. He deserves something better. When he finished, the room was silent. Everything changed after this letter, Julian said softly. Not just for Daniel, who now leads our cultural transformation from the inside out. Not just for his daughter, who reminded me of what leadership really means, but for me. He scanned the crowd. Some had tears in their eyes. Others simply stared, unsure what to do with the lump forming in their throats. I didn't build a company, Julian said. Not really. I built a machine. But Daniel and Lily showed me how to build something human. He stepped back, letting the silence speak. And in that stillness, the audience rose quietly, together. Not for wealth. Not for strategy. But for a little girl's letter, and the man who listened. The sun poured through the apartment window in soft golden rays, warming the small kitchen where Lily Carter sat, her legs tucked under her on the chair, pencil in hand. The table was scattered with colored pens, stickers, and a fresh notebook, its first page still blank, waiting. Daniel moved quietly behind her, pouring coffee, humming the same tune he always did when he felt peaceful. He looked different now, not in the way he dressed or walked, but in the way he carried himself. Taller somehow, lighter. But Lily didn't look up. She was busy with something important. The first words came slowly, carefully. Dear me, this is a letter to remind you of everything that matters. She paused, tapping the eraser against her lip. Then she smiled and kept writing. Remember how Dad used to work all night? How he never complained, even when he was tired? Remember how scared we were sometimes, but how he always made us feel safe? Her pencil moved steadily, the words pouring from someplace deep. She wasn't writing to fix something this time. She was writing to remember. Never forget what a kind heart can do. One letter changed everything. Not just for Dad, but for me. It showed me that people are listening even when it doesn't feel like it. So, always use your voice, even if your hands shake. In the corner of the page, she drew a little stick figure herself, a bit taller, wearing a superhero cape. Daniel leaned over and glanced down at the letter, his eyes soft. Writing to the CEO again? He asked with a smile. Lily grinned. Nope, this one's for future me. He bent down, kissed the top of her head. She's going to need that, and she'll be proud. Lily kept writing. Kindness matters, bravery matters. And sometimes, when the world feels too big, remember a little girl once wrote a letter that made it smaller, better, softer. She paused at the end, then underlined her final words in bold, purple ink. Never forget what a kind heart can do. And somewhere deep in the stillness of that quiet morning, the world felt full of possibilities again.